with the kind of advent of this mass culture, you start getting, and literacy and print, you start getting a more uniform kind of standardization. I don't want to go too far with that because it's still very nascent in the 18th century, but it's worth asking, what does popular print and popular literacy mean? And as you're going to see, I'm not going to really have the answer for that, but then no one really does. All right, so popular print. For just the sake of ease, I've divided popular print into a few different categories I'm briefly going to discuss. So we have religious print, educational print, practical print, leisure, periodicals, and part books. The thing I would most emphasize here, because it's not something that we naturally think of, is what do you think the most popular of these genres is? Anyone? You have like a 1 in 5 chance of getting it. Religious, yes, by far. It's not even close. Religious print is by far the most quote-unquote popular print of the 18th century. There are definite reasons for this, both in the fact that people are naturally religious, but also this is what people tend to associate with print anyways. Right? We're going to talk more about that in just a bit. So religious print, so this is the Christian pattern, or a treatise of the imitation of Jesus Christ. This is interesting because it's actually a translation of Thomas à Kempis' work. So this is a really old work that's been translated in 1698, and it's, I think, republished in about 30-something different editions in about 30 years. Right? The reason why I included that is, basically, there's this continuous demand for religious print that doesn't go away, meaning that this isn't just kind of the playing out of kind of a dying genre of print. Meaning religious print isn't just sort of petering off as the Enlightenment progresses, but rather it's something that people are still connecting with in a very visceral way. Then we have educational books. I'm going to defer most of this to Jeff and Paul since they know much more about it, I would imagine, than I do. And so this is a guide to the English tongue in 2 parts. This goes through, I think, something like, what is it, 200, so, oh wow, I have a note on this, 33 editions between 1733 and 1747, and 265,000 of these were printed. That's pretty amazing. Then we have practical books, so manuals, guides, almanacs. These are very popular. This is just the court keeper, legal books. I just always like to throw this in. 17th and 18th century England/Britain, incredibly litigious. We talk about today in America, but everyone wants to see everyone else. They kind of did back then, to a certain extent, and I love it. And then we have leisure books. Now, leisure books are new. These are things that didn't really exist as much in the 17th century. It's kind of a new kind of genre of print, this notion of chapbooks and ballads and things like that, that were popular in the sense that they were produced and they were given to many people. They had access to them. And so leisure books really, still at this point, are kind of dripping down into more popular classes. But here I just want to briefly talk about Pamela, my favorite. So 18th century is the rise of the novel. Now, the novel, I'm sure all of you read a novel at some point in your life. I hope anyway. Right? So Pamela, a horrible book. But anyway, incredibly popular. Incredibly popular. Basically, Pamela is about a servant girl who is, the plot is actually similar, I think, to some of these today. She's a servant girl, lower class, who is seduced by another man, by sort of a master, because it's the 18th century, 1700s. She and the man marry. But what makes it interesting isn't that he marries her, brings her up, but it's kind of, in some ways, giving Pamela herself a little bit of agency. But what we get in this is this kind of new notion of print as being, in some sense, I don't want to say trashy, but trash in the sense of once you finish it, you're done. Right? And that's a new thing, because in all these other genres of print that we were looking at, those are all reusable in a certain sense. Right? So you go back to a religious text, for example, and you read about whatever association with whoever, and you can go back and reread and reread and reread that. Novels, on the other hand, are giving you some of this new sort of time-limited, in some sense, print that when you're done, you can reread it, but it's not the same anymore. Right? And so instead, you start looking for the next novel. Right? And this is how you get people like Stephen King. So next time you read Stephen King or Charlene Harris or any other popular novelist today, think about Pamela or Virtue Rewarded. Next up, we have periodicals and part books. So periodicals, we briefly talked about. Part books. Part books are essentially serial publications. Usually they were sometimes books that were just printed in parts, and so you got them a little bit at a time. And one of the kind of virtues of this, especially in areas outside of London, because print is spread outside of London in the 18th century, is that they were more affordable and easier to transport. They, in some ways, I kind of just always think of them as early modern comic books, just because I just throw everything into early modern in front of it, and I just pick something modern. Right? So my dissertation, for example, I call early modern Facebook. Now, newspapers. So newspapers are crucial because newspapers set out both new information amongst provinces in particular, and they are really what become the distribution networks for many avenues of print in the 18th century. And newspapers in general, just like that. So they change a little bit in the sense that they look fancier today, but they're, I think, pretty recognizable. They give you basic news, they give you advertisements, they give you pretty much everything that you're used to getting. And then 2 other things I want to briefly talk about are kind of new avenues for access to print. So coffee houses exist, but coffee houses, by and large, tend to be a more urban phenomena. And what you get in areas outside of London, and including London, obviously, are the advent of libraries. So both libraries that are fixed, so stationed, and then libraries that are circulating in the sense of they tend to be smaller. This is just in Boston. So libraries, we kind of, I think, take for granted today. Does anyone actually go to any of the libraries in Berkeley? Yeah, not many. All right. Yeah, but you're surrounded by libraries here. I encourage you to go. I love libraries. That's where I usually procrastinate the best. But libraries come into the fore. Libraries are not, though, places that necessarily everyone has access to. These are not public libraries. That's an important point to make. These are libraries that are more for people who have a little bit of money because they're often private, and so they often require some amount of money to get into. Because you're not going to necessarily, for example, trust some guy who's hobbling in and wants to grab a book or something. That's the notion. We also have book clubs. Does anyone belong to a book club? Too ashamed. I bet you there's somebody who belongs to a book club. You just don't admit it. All right. So book clubs. So reading in general, and this is something I didn't get to talk about, but I talk about it a bit more in my dissertation. Reading in general in the 17th and 18th centuries is a much different kind of process than we kind of regard it today in certain ways. And so social reading, especially in provinces, was actually very popular in the sense of, because literacy wasn't necessarily widespread, although we're going to get to literacy in just a minute, because literacy wasn't necessarily widespread, often what you would find, especially with religious print, is that there would be a few people in, let's say, a village or a town who were literate. They would get access to a particular book, and then they would sit down and read it out loud to other people. Right? And so there was a sort of diffusion of kind of the knowledge that was distilled in these books. Although I've always sort of wondered, let's say somebody just pretended they could read. I wonder if that happened. We don't know. But there was this diffusion of knowledge that would occur, but ultimately, we have no way of measuring that. And this is actually going to be a really big issue when we talk about popular literacy, which we're going to do now. So popular literacy in history, and I can't say anything about the theories behind it because I didn't study that, but in history it's a really kind of vexing problem because we have no way of knowing. We tend to try and figure out literacy based upon what's sometimes called signature literacy, meaning that we just look in registers and records and we figure out who can sign their name. But people started figuring out decades ago that that was actually very deceptive, because ultimately that tends to assume that somebody who can sign their name is literate and that somebody who can't sign their name isn't literate. And the two skills actually, even though we tend to think of them as going together, they don't necessarily go together. And in fact, an historian in the 18th century historian went back in Scotland and he looked at groups of women, for example, and found that you could actually figure out that, I think his sample was 10 women. All 10 women were actually literate, but none of them could actually sign their names, and none of them could write, because that wasn't considered to be something that was necessary for women to do. And so there's a lot of different theories going around about the actual rate of literacy in this time period, because we just don't know. There's not schooling, right? So schooling is something that is essentially private. So some people go to school, some people don't. Some people can have access to some place like Oxford or Cambridge. Some people have access to things called dissenting academies, so schools that are set up by the Nonconformist Protestant Pride Study, for example. But we have no real way of tracking any of that. And there's going to be the start of these charity schools, we're going to talk about in just a second. But at this time period, everything tends to be very private, in the sense of we have no way of tracing or tracking. And so historians argue back and forth about whether somebody is literate or not. Chartier, very good cultural historian, French cultural historian, basically acknowledges this, right? The percentages that we think we have almost certainly are exaggerating the number of people who can write, and they are underestimating the number of people who can read, right? Just because of the signature question. What we think we know is, in England, by the middle of the 18th century, we're guessing, and again, total guess, about 60% of men were literate and 40% of women. So, what I'm going to do, from the meeting I have, is just briefly go through part of an argument I had in one of my chapters in my dissertation, which is essentially a case study on the spreading of literacy in the 18th century. The points that I'm going to kind of be emphasizing here is the degree to which, in the 18th century, popular print and popular religion are really inseparable. Because popular religion is what's ultimately going to be giving access for many of these people to literacy and to print. So it's not necessarily a choice they have on their part, but it's something that just is created through what I sort of tongue-in-cheek refer to as the apology of literacy. So where this begins is with this kind of dour-looking dude named Thomas Bray, who forms a society for promoting Christian knowledge. So the Society for Promoting Christian Knowledge is actually, in some ways, an offshoot or an advancement of what I briefly talked about earlier, the Societies for the Reformation of Manners. And so what we're seeing in England in particular, and this spreads actually also to Scotland and Ireland and Wales, is the formation of these private societies, these private kind of cultural, social societies, primarily interested in things like reforming manners and morals. And what Bray does is he manages in certain ways to appeal to patrons, wealthy patrons who give him money, and to create kind of a system throughout England and into Scotland and Ireland and Wales, to lesser degrees, of associations in which he manages to essentially create a hierarchy with the SPCK that is able to reach a popular audience in a way that no other mechanism of print had ever done in England. So how do they do that? Well, basically, all he needs to do is he creates the SPCK, he gets a lot of money, he has avenues to print, he uses those avenues to print things out, he uses these local chapters that exist throughout England already in order to distribute this print. This print is either A, completely free, or B, extremely cheap, not very well made, but doesn't need to be. And essentially, you kind of, I always think of it as like you get the sprinkling down of these religious tracts starting in the early 18th century. And along with that, the SPCK quickly decides, well, a lot of these people can't read, and if we want them to be able to read our stuff, if we want them to be able to reform and to be able to kind of follow what we're preaching, they need to read, so they start founding schools. So we know they founded about 1,000 schools by 1729. They claimed around 1,500, so half again as many. You figure that's probably for publicity. Numbers in general in early modern Europe and in Britain, always unreliable. You just kind of always guess. Dutton claimed that he printed 600 books in his professional career up until 1705. We've been able to track down 200, so who knows. I think they just kind of at a certain point decide there's many, and we'll just go for a round number. Okay? So they distribute all of these books. I gave a talk in Britain a few years ago when I talked about the number of Bibles that were distributed in England and in Scotland, and the gentleman there pointed out that he was a librarian in Scotland. It's sort of this running joke, though, because in Scotland, at least, a lot of these cheap Bibles were never read, so even though they're extremely cheap, they still exist. So there's hundreds of these free Bibles that are just kind of sitting there. So that is actually an area where I've been kind of looking at trying to revise in my dissertation, simply because there does tend to be this assumption that just because somebody is printing something and distributing it, that it's being read. And that's not really a safe assumption. We don't know that. We know that these things are being distributed. We know that if you look at contemporary accounts of people in the 19th century, so my dissertation advisor has done work on this, we know that a lot of poor people, if and when they did have literature, it tended to be stuff like this. So we know that it was sort of reaching them, but we don't know whether they were reading it. We don't know how it was impacting them in any real way. And so this takes us back to Samuel Wesley, who you remember was one of the Athenians. So he's very taken with all of this. So this is talking about the SPCK, right? The first care is to set schools for the poor, wherein children, or if need be adult persons, may be instructed in the fundamentals of Christianity by men of known and approved piety. Their second design is to procure little practical treatises from Holland, England, and Germany, to translate them into the vulgar tongue, print them, and so to give or lend them to those who are less solicitous of their own and others' edification. The third is to establish correspondence with such societies in England, Germany, etc., that so they may mutually edify one another. The fourth is to take care of the sick and other poor, and to afford them spiritual as well as corporal help. Now, obviously this is for Wesley anyway, but this is actually kind of true of what they prioritized. And so what I would point out here is they're not prioritizing taking care of the sick and poor in terms of their material needs, right? They're prioritizing schooling so they can be holy. Right? And beyond that, they want to combine with other like-minded evangelical Protestants, particularly in Germany, who are pursuing similar processes and similar ideas. And so what we have with the SPCK in the 18th century is sort of this private, religious, popular attempt to appeal to groups of people who are, in many ways, historically ignored up until this point, in the sense of these are people who are just kind of regarded as being out in the boonies. They're not in London, although some of them are in London, but they're not in London, they're not kind of central to us, so we don't really pay attention to them. So this is where they're kind of entering into the history here. And so, to talk about the educational experiences of the poor, I couldn't resist. This is actually one of the first things written by my dissertation advisor, is the educational experiences of the poor. Right? And so this is where we get into kind of the nuts and bolts of why popular literacy is difficult, because things like this, right? Evidence suggests that literacy was transmitted in much the same way as were traditional occupational skills. This is amongst the poor. Most children learn to read and perhaps to write from their parents or from neighbors, unlicensed and untrained, in settings which we today, and indeed 19th century observers, would have hesitated to call schools. Right? So 4 points emerge from the study of the educational experiences of the poor. Learning to read and write was not a distinct activity undertaken during a compact period in one's life, but part of a process, which might go from early childhood well into adulthood. Smatterings of these skills might be acquired as the opportunity and the necessity arose, so the process was organically related to the rest of life. Teaching literacy was a task divided between parents, relatives, friends, local old men and women who kept small and highly informal schools, and occasionally by masters and endowed charity schools. And finally, there were ample opportunities to use literary skills, either for work, for religious education, or for measure. Right? This is something I go back to a lot because it's a good reminder, especially for me and what I study, of the limits to what we can know and what we do know. And especially if you're talking about something like popular literacy or popular print, the knowledge that there's so much of this that is by necessity dark to us in the sense of we have no way to access it. All of these things are lost simply because they're not recorded. No one was recording them. And since they're not recorded, for an historian's point of view, it's almost like they don't exist too often. Oops. So in terms of what this meant overall, what we see is essentially this conditioning to print of a particular popular religious kind is occurring starting in the early 18th century with the SPCK, piggybacking off of the Reformation of Manners. With the opening of licensing and the opening of print in general, you now have the means to actually reach this audience. Because these people tend not to be that interested in profit, the print that they produce tends to be at the very worst, kind of at cost, in the sense of they're not necessarily trying to make a huge amount of profit from this particular type of print, which means they print a lot more of it. And it means that this print reaches a lot larger regions because they're not as concerned about trying to make a living, let alone trying to get back everything that they're giving out. Right? So in terms of the 18th century, when we think about the advance of modernity, this is not a modern system that's being set out as such. Right? This isn't something that is going to be replicated by anyone who actually wants to be successful in publishing business. So as an example of the growth of print, this is just one person that I've looked at. So this guy, Dr. John Cook of Bristol. Bristol actually had a pretty good access to print because of its location. It was a port city. So he left a library of 1,500 books at his death in 1720. Most of them were medical and theological books, and none of them were any of the 85 works we know to have been produced in Bristol between 1695 and 1720. So you can think about it in those terms. So in a 25-year period, there's 85 works produced in Bristol. Right? So by 1800, Bristol had now produced 1,667 books. Right? So again, that's not necessarily a huge number by modern standards, but over 85, that's quite a lot. Right? And then over 400 of these books were directly related to one particular religious movement that in many ways, and especially England as a whole, is an offshoot of the SBCK, so Methodism, which is a way to get back to the Wesleys again, because I love the Wesleys. So Samuel Wesley's son, John Wesley, is the founder of Methodism. I think probably Methodism today might be best known for being George W. Bush's religion. Are there any Methodists in here? No one wants to admit it. Methodists are really interesting. I think, Paul, you assigned me Thompson work. Yeah. So there's a famous British Marxist historian who basically blames the Methodists for kind of the modern world. It says the Methodists ruined everything. For my purposes, what I'm interested in with the Methodists is the degree to which they are kind of the outcome and perfection of the process that I've kind of been very sketchily laying out to you in terms of popular literacy and popular religion. So the Methodists are kind of building off of everything that we looked at before in the sense of they build off of the print networks that have already developed, they build off of the social connections that have already been in existence, and they ultimately are able to use all of those things to rapidly expand themselves into quite a formidable popular religious force. John Walsh, a very nice man, he writes, the rapidity with which early Methodism established itself owed a great deal to its ability to cannibalize the religious societies. Methodists used to the full the personal links with them, which had been built up in previous years, and exploited the stagnation which had overtaken some of the societies, a number of which seemed to have been bereft of any firm clerical control. So Methodism begins in basically 1739 with this one person's very personal experience with God, where he feels like his heart is warmed. But he manages to translate that one personal experience into this mass movement that is incredibly popular, not only with sort of English people around England and beyond, but in particular becomes incredibly important to an urban culture that's developing in the cities that in many ways is a very unhappy one. I don't really have time to talk about industrialization, but the social and cultural costs of industrialization during this period are quite great. And Methodism, and this is kind of going somewhat against E.P. Thompson's point, Methodism is actually one way in which many people use to kind of make themselves feel better. For Thompson's point of view, that's kind of like a narcotic and it's a bad thing. From my point of view, I tend to try not to be judgmental. And that whole issue of not being judgmental is kind of getting us to the end of this talk, which is where we sort of begin in a roundabout way with the Raven piece. Did anyone read the Raven piece yet? You? I'll take what I can get. Right? So the Raven piece, what I found most interesting about, the reason why I assigned it isn't because it's actually giving you any firm answers to anything, because it's not. So I'll give that away if you haven't read it already. You're not going to get any answers in the Raven piece, really. What you're going to get are a lot of questions. And the reason why he has a lot of questions is because ultimately, when we're talking about something like popular print and popular literacy in the 18th century, if not before, what we're really talking about is guesswork, or what one historian once called historical imagination. And what this means is we don't know a lot, and we have no real way of knowing a lot. And Raven's argument in the end, right, is the challenge is to attempt a mediation between text and reader, which involves a history of comparative reading competences, typographical recognition, changes in the physical form of the text and evidence of variations in the resources of the reader. The history of the construal of meaning by text must consider how they were confronted and appropriated by the reader. It must attempt a recovery of forgotten gestures and practices and a textual motivation, enactment and effect. It must try to include problematic definitions of audiences and consider the shared use of text in contrast between the freedom of the reader and the crowd control offered by the textual form. Now, when I read that, I basically look, I see this class, right? I see this class as being sort of the outcome of an effort of how can you do something like a reading history? How can you do something involving information in some sense of a popular group? And I think you kind of have to go through the same process as you're going through in this class, right? You start looking at structures and processes, you start looking at form and content, and you start trying to really cobble things together. And so that's really why I assigned this. I assigned this because, one, it's pointing out the old ways we had of doing things like this, or trying to do things like that, they ultimately don't really work. And they're all unsatisfactory. And that's not to say that this class and this particular way is going to be wholly satisfactory, because it's probably not. But ultimately, it's going to be a little bit better than that which came before. And like most of what I've been looking at in terms of this particular lecture, it's going to build on the shoulders of previous things. And finally, that leaves us with, so where does that leave us today? Right? So this is how I would just summarize all of it in a very long and rambling talk. Right? So the 18th century is experiencing the very beginnings of what becomes what we can today construe as a mass culture, as distinct from a popular culture. So you can think about what the difference between those two might be, if you like. Because of, among other factors, the rise of literacy, education, and print, despite the accelerating changes, little of what happens is yet revolutionary in the sense that what is changing doesn't involve miraculous or ingenious advances, but rather the application of pre-existing resources and technologies. There's no reading revolution happening here as much as it is a reading reformation. What that means is, literacy rates, as far as we can figure, they're not exploding in the 18th century. We think that they're expanding, but we don't really know, obviously. And in terms of things that are being created, there's no like great technology that is suddenly changing everything that had existed before for the period that I study in particular. And so instead what you get is kind of these small changes. And these small changes sort of snowball into larger changes. And you sort of have a history that ultimately is taking on, in some sense, a speed of its own. And in terms of where this leaves popular